Hello everyone, welcome to What's Missing. Today we'll be talking about a video from Shofar Ministries, the latest in a series called Prophecy Update. Here, our host Bob Mitchell explains to his audience that the end times are at hand, providing an argument and his ideas about why he believes this to be the case. By taking a closer look at his evidence, however, we begin to see the pitfalls in his argument and the missteps that seem to be perpetuating his certainty that we are living in the end times. But before we get into it, I would like to play his video for you so we can best understand, in his own words, what exactly is missing here. Let's take a look.
Hi friends, this may be one of the most important videos I've produced, so please share it and please stay with me to the end of the video. In light of the current events, we're going to look at Bible prophecy and the coronavirus and beyond. At this moment, linked to the virus debacle, we see China is now very much in the news, which again is very pertinent when it comes to the end times and the return of Jesus. Not only are relations between China and the USA and the West deteriorating worse than they have been in decades, but people are now talking about a possible war between the USA and China. Also, just days ago, the military of China and India clashed with quite a few casualties. Now that in itself raises the prophetic eyebrows, because we're told in Revelation that one of the very last end-time signs is an army of 200 million coming from the sun rising toward the west. Now all of this is due to happen when the armies of the world meet in Israel in the valley of Jezreel, known as Armageddon. And that happens as the Lord Jesus returns from heaven. But funnily enough, China just a few years ago said that they could muster an army of that exact same number, 200 million. Isn't that amazing?
Alright, so for me, the believability of Mitchell's statement here falls into question when we take a closer look at the Bible verse he's talking about. Revelation 9:16 does speak of an army of 200 million, but it also specifies that these 200 million are all mounted troops, which in the days when Revelation was written, in the 90s AD, would have meant horse-riding cavalry. So, because the modern Chinese military does not include a force of 200 million cavalry, we cannot accept Mitchell's statement to be fact with regard to the biblical text here. But perhaps a more modern interpretation is appropriate in this case. Maybe the Bible predicted the use of tanks and armored vehicles and other kinds of vehicularly mounted personnel. Well, even when taking this consideration, the Chinese military still does not possess a 200 million strong manned force of vehicles. Now, I found a force related to what Mitchell is talking about here, linked below, and it seems the Chinese military were citing a militia force based in the homeland, numbering about 200 million. The difference here, though, is a militia force is not the same as an army of mounted troops, nor one made up of armored vehicles. And we know this because, by definition, a militia is just a body of armed civilian volunteers. So, okay, this militia is not made up of cavalry nor armored vehicles, but it could still be used to attack the West, right? Well, the most likely case is no, because a militia is normally regarded as a defensive force, because not only do they lack the skill, weapons, and vehicles of a professional army, but they're also full-time workers attached to the industry of their country. They would be unable to abandon their jobs for extended periods of time without negatively impacting their nation. Additionally, without professional training, these volunteers remain unable to cooperate and coordinate effectively with a larger global military campaign. It feels irresponsible of Mitchell to make this argument here, because not only did he misrepresent the Chinese military and their own statistics, but his own Bible. I have to wonder, as a man of God, wouldn't he, of all people, have noticed this quote from Revelation 9:16 had specified mounted troops, not a militia? Why would he leave out that specific piece of the biblical quote? Did he just forget? Or did he think it was just unimportant? Because a detail like what type of troops the Bible is talking about is very important when we're discussing something as serious and specific as how the end times will come about. If I were him, I would have done some research here so I could be as accurate as possible. And yet, in this case, he's misquoting all of his sources, biblical and otherwise. Anyway, let's move on.
But what else does the prophetic future hold? What is just around the corner? Well, last October, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hosted a roundtable discussion regarding a possible pandemic with a fictional coronavirus-type outbreak. The forum was titled Event 201, with the world forming the zero between the 2 and the 1. Now remember, that was last October. Now think about that.
Okay, so there's some information here that Mitchell seems to be misrepresenting. To start, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did not, as he claimed, host Event 201. They merely served as one of 3 teams participating in the event, theirs being led by a man named Jeffrey French. The actual host of Event 201, and the ones funding it, was an organization called the Open Philanthropy Project, which serves as the grant distribution arm of a company called Good Ventures. This distribution arm is run by a former news reporter named Carrie Tuna, while Good Ventures is run by her husband, aimed at investing money into scientific research and humanitarian aid. But Mitchell has not only misled us in terms of who was in charge of Event 201, but he also mistakenly called the event a roundtable discussion about a fictional coronavirus-type outbreak. This event was not just a discussion. It was a scenario-based competition, each team charged with working through realistic situations and conditions concerning a global pandemic. And further, as the videos on the Event 201 website state, this work was not conducted with regard to a potential coronavirus-type outbreak, which sounds very vague. No, their videos state a specific concern with the coronavirus and its potential to become a global pandemic. From my understanding, there are several sources indicating that the first coronavirus cases were detected as early as October 6, 2019, Event 201 taking place just 2 weeks later as a reaction to these early virus transmissions from animal to person. Now, my main concern with Mitchell's argument here is he frames Event 201 as some secretive discussion among economic powers, citing the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as their leader, or at least their host. In reality, this scenario-based competition was really intended to assess just how prepared the world was for a pandemic, and to measure the extent of the damage that would be caused. Event 201 should not be viewed with fear and mistrust, but with admiration, because without their work on October 18th, we as the people of Earth would have been far the worse for it. If no preparation for this pandemic was done, I can assure you there would have been far more deaths earlier on, and there also would have been a greater amount of ignorance regarding how this pandemic would play out.
And I guess you all know the world is now rushing to place an antivirus vaccine into our bodies. And if you go to the link at the bottom of this picture, you'll notice it's a page from the World Economic Forum's Strategic Intelligence page, where they talk about, among other things, biotechnology. Now, get this. This is important. It is also known as body activity data that is delivered by a biocompatible near-infrared quantum dot tattoo placed on the skin by micro-needle patches to record the vaccination. It will identify those who have been vaccinated, and of course they will find out if you have not been vaccinated. This will also include your digital ID to allow you to access basic goods and services. Sounds like Revelation 13, doesn't it? You cannot buy or sell unless you have the mark. Now, this could be the precursor to the coming mark of the beast of Revelation 13.
Okay, so Mitchell uses a lot of qualifying language here. He says that this vaccine may be a precursor to the mark of the beast. He seems very careful not to make a direct biblical connection. However, if we look at the text, Revelation 13:17 specifies that the mark of the beast would either be the beast's name or his number, 666. Now, nowhere in the text does it say anything about a precursor, so I don't understand how Mitchell would even think to reach this conclusion, unless he somehow thinks he knows more about how the end times will come about than his own Bible. Now, without a biblical reference, it doesn't make sense to insinuate this vaccine tattoo would serve such an evil purpose, even if the reference to control over goods and services matches up. Without the beast's name or number lying on the left hand or forehead, there's no connection between ancient prophecy and this modern vaccine. If all Mitchell's relying on to make this biblical connection is the fact this tattoo leaves a mark on the skin, then logically you can make that same statement about any tattoo, birthmark, or scar. Since the mark wouldn't necessarily need to be the beast's name or number to begin with, according to Mitchell at least, that also means literally any mark on the skin could be a precursor to the real one. Let's say this vaccine is a precursor to the mark of the beast. Well, what if I chose to get it injected on my forearm instead of the left hand or forehead? By the rules stipulated in the Bible, this vaccine tattoo could not be the mark it's talking about, unless it appeared on the correct part of the body. See, these logical gaps between Mitchell's argument and the text have only further convinced me that Mitchell doesn't care about the text to begin with. He seems chiefly concerned with creating as emotionally impactful an argument as possible, without regard to the Bible he claims to have so much faith for. Anyway, let's continue.